Professor Charles Xavier, one of the most respected figures within the Marvel Universe, the calm, collective, and pacifistic figurehead for the X-Men, who leads by example, hoping that one day mutants can live alongside humanity in peace and harmony. A thoroughly nice dude all in all, right? Well, maybe not. As Kitty Pryde so memorably put it in Uncanny X-Men 168, Professor Xavier is a jerk. Patrick Stewart is awesome obviously, but you don't get to be a comic book character with as much power and history as Professor X without pulling some pretty shifty shenanigans in your time. So with that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, back from celebrating my dog's 8th birthday to bring you the 10 worst things Professor X has ever done. Number 10. Killing the X-Men in Logan. In the comic book Old Man Logan that the awesome movie Logan is based on, it's Wolverine himself that's responsible for the absence of all the other X-Men. As a result of an illusion by Mysterio, Wolverine straight up slaughters all the inhabitants of Charles Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, believing them to be enemies attacking the school. Yeah, it's pretty messed up, but in the film, things play out a little differently. It's actually Charles Xavier who was responsible for all those deaths. According to Pierce in the film, Xavier's incredible mutant powers have been classified by the government as a weapon of mass destruction. We actually see the insane power of his decaying mind in full action during the sequence in the casino. While in the grips of a seizure, Professor X inflicts a devastating field of psychic energy, paralyzing everyone in a huge radius with pain and almost killing them all before Logan can get to him. Afterwards, we hear of a similar incident that resulted in many deaths occurring in Westchester, the former location of Xavier's school. The reality is, at some point before Logan takes place, Charles killed all his students and friends during a seizure brought about as a result of his illness. Now, it wasn't really the professor's fault, obviously, which is why this is only at number 10, but inadvertently or not, the fact remains that in Fox's cinematic universe, Charles Xavier is the one responsible for the deaths of dozens, if not hundreds of the people he swore to protect. Number 9. Faking his death multiple times. Professor X is a pretty responsible guy in the sense that he's got a load of emotionally vulnerable teenagers miles away from their families that rely on him for support, so he's not really in a position to just up and leave whenever he likes. But he did multiple times, and rather than just let folks know he wanted a holiday on a wheelchair-accessible beach in Hawaii or something, he just straight up faked his death. Cue emotional devastation from all of his students and the X-Men, as well as the unlucky Jean Grey, who he forced to lie to her teammates to continue the charade while he played possum. The reason he did it was stupid too, just because he needed a little alone time to work. Like, dude, just ask for some privacy. It's way less stress and also doesn't condemn all your students to years of therapy as you yo-yo back between life and death every time you've got a few extra memos to send out. Number 8. Enslaving the Danger Room. One of the best parts of living legend Joss Whedon's astonishing X-Men run was the Dangerous story arc, where it was revealed that the Danger Room, the constantly evolving assault course come death trap the X-Men used to train, was actually a sentient being. After convincing a recently depowered mutant to kill himself, controlling an old Sentinel to attack the X-Mansion, and then trapping the entire student body, Danger took humanoid form and flew off to kill Professor Xavier, because it turns out that Xavier had long since been aware of the machine becoming self-aware, but decided just not to mention it to anyone. After all, it was still doing a good job of training up groups of mutant superheroes, so what's the harm in enslaving a machine, right, Charlie? Number 7. Covering up a team of dead X-Men. Yeah, so about this. Most of the X-Men as you know them today, including Storm, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler, were introduced in Giant Size X-Men number 1, a relaunch of the series which was, believe it or not, flagging in popularity back in the day. The team gets a relaunch in the story itself too, with Cyclops being the only member of the original X-Men called up to be a part of Xavier's new team. Except it was revealed in the mini-series Deadly Genesis that before the band of merry mutants we know and love hit the streets to kick ass and chew gum, Xavier had cobbled together an even more ragtag bunch who had managed to get themselves killed, except for Cyclops, obviously, and Xavier covered up their deaths and wiped the memories from Cyclops' mind. So not only did he send a group of kids to their deaths, he covered his ass by wiping anyone's mind who remembered the incident and proceeded to immediately send another group of teenagers into perilous situations as well. You'd think a bunch of dead kids would be kind of a deterrent on that, but apparently not. Number 6. Fancying Jean Grey when she was still a child. Among the various other things that came to light when Xavier went all nutso and became the all-powerful villain Onslaught, more on that later, was the long-building revelation that the fatherly professor had some less than fatherly feelings towards one of his earliest recruits, namely the fellow psychic Jean Grey. Now you gotta know that Xavier recruited and taught Jean from when she was a child, unlike any of the other original X-Men. He's basically a father to her, and he actually wanted to hashtag Hulk smash that. Actually pretty freaking weird there, Charlie. Jean found out during the Onslaught series trying to get the sane Xavier beneath all that 90s angst, and was faced with the fact that her father figure totally wanted to bang her. Number 5. Manipulating Wolverine. One of the kindest things Professor Xavier ever did was to take in the feral, violent Wolverine, who had previously been subject to barbaric scientific experiments by a shadowy government organization, and rehabilitate him. Except that's totally not what happened at all, and in fact the Professor had an ulterior motive all along. It turns out that Wolverine and Xavier had met well before what we all assumed was their initial meeting, as seen in Giant Size X-Men number 1. In that comic, the Professor wasn't actually recruiting Logan from the Canadian military. He had long since ensured Wolvie would be a part of the team, because back in the day, the former Weapon X had been brainwashed and sent to kill Xavier, who then brainwashed Wolverine in turn, not only to save himself, but also because, in his own words, Professor X needed a weapon. So all this time, Wolverine had thought the X-Men to be his chance to escape his violent past, when that's exactly what Xavier wanted him for. Number 4. Being part of the Illuminati. In Marvel Comics, the Illuminati is a group of some of the most powerful people on Earth, including Tony Stark, Reed Richards, Doctor Strange, and Professor Xavier. So, admittedly, some of the blame for the terrible things this group did behind the scenes has to be shared, but Xavier was still involved. One of their early attempts to intervene with Marvel history saw them captured and analyzed by the shape-shifting Skrulls, culminating in the recent Secret Invasion storyline, where it turned out that many superheroes were actually alien spies in disguise. They shot the Hulk into space because he was becoming a nuisance, resulting in World War Hulk, and they managed to lose the ultra-powerful Infinity Gems, putting the entirety of existence in peril. And they had the cockiness to name their little club after a group that is said to control the world. To be honest, even though they're all technically heroes, they mess up way more than they do any good. I'm all for teamwork, but when you piss off the Hulk to the point where he literally rocks the earth by stomping on it, you done messed up big time. Number 3. Trying to kill his twin in the womb. Professor X has done a lot of messed up stuff during his time on Earth, but then he started early. In fact, he started before he was even born, as revealed in the Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely all-new X-Men series that introduced Cassandra Nova, Xavier's previously unheard of twin sister. So why had we not caught word of this female villain that shared DNA with the X-Men's fearless leader before? Well, because Xavier himself had done his very best to murder her whilst they were both still in the womb. Supposedly this was because the baby professor, who had somehow already developed psychic powers before arms and legs and stuff, sensed that the similarly infant Cassandra was evil. In the end, she lived on through some psychic mumbo jumbo and just came back super pissed off, so he's kind of responsible for everything she did afterwards, because he was the one who made her pissed off. She probably just needed a hug, but no, he went straight for the murder, even as a fetus. Number 2. The Xavier Protocols. One of the more disturbing discoveries made throughout the Onslaught saga was the revelation of the so-called Xavier Protocols. Now, the mutant population includes some of the most powerful people in the Marvel Universe, which is saying something. What would happen if those powers were ever used for evil? Well, simply, you just dip into the extensive collection of contingency plans Professor Xavier happens to have on file, which tells you the best way to murder all of his students. These are the kids that he's sworn to protect, but before all of that, he's just got to make sure that he knows exactly how best to murder them first. Number 1. Onslaught. Here we are, the summit of Professor Xavier's jerkiness, the climax of his douchebaggery, the cherry on top of a sundae made principally of being a massive twat. Which makes sense, because Onslaught was essentially all of the barely repressed awfulness Charles Xavier had been trying to hide for years, given physical form. In all seriousness, Xavier is a good dude, really. Like, we've gone through the worst things he's done, but he's also done way more good things. But Onslaught is Xavier in full-on evil mode, all of the worst of him. In the aftermath of the Fatal Attraction storyline, where Magneto ripped the adamantium from Wolverine's bones, almost killing him, Xavier unleashed an unprecedented attack, wiping his former friend's mind completely. But in doing this, Magneto's soul bonded with the dark part of Charles's and took the form of Onslaught, a towering behemoth of a 90s supervillain who tussled with basically every major player in the Marvel Universe. Along with all the other revelations that came out as a result of Onslaught, it was also responsible for mucking up nearly a year's worth of comics in a kind of bloated crossover event, if we're being totally honest. Love the Onslaught saga or hate it though, you can't deny that for the time that he was part of Onslaught, Xavier was up there with the greatest supervillains the Earth has ever faced.